Bueno, muchas gracias por este tiempo. Vamos a continuar con la siguiente sesión, que va a estar coordinada por Iván Boisier. Iván Boisier es doctor en Sociología de las Organizaciones y codirector del ISCI, y él coordinará la sesión con la que participará Dominic Cooper. ¿Okay?
Es un placer presentarle a Dominic. Me parece interesante señalar la trayectoria de Dominic para entender un poco el valor agregado que va a brindar después. Dominic empezó su carrera en el terreno, en un sector de alto riesgo porque fue militar al principio de su carrera, y después trabajó en obras de construcción. Entonces, un poco después pasó a la parte académica porque hizo un doctorado en psicología industrial y organizacional en la famosa Universidad de Manchester, donde se graduó, y es interesante ver esta trayectoria para entender que siempre fue un puente entre la academia y los conocimientos en cultura de seguridad, liderazgo y la práctica. Desde la parte académica después fue, por ejemplo, profesor en psicología, en seguridad, psicología industrial en la Universidad de Indiana, Bloomington, en Estados Unidos, y también se dedicó a implementar estos modelos en la práctica como consultor, porque es el gerente de la empresa P-Safe en Management System. Entonces, un placer muy grande introducir y dejar la palabra a Dominic. Dominic, up to you.
Gracias. Buenos días, señoras y señores. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, I can't speak Danish or Scandinavian. Wait. Oh, merci. So, thank you to the committee for inviting me to do this. You forced me to do a piece of work that I'd wanted to do for a long time, but could never find the time to do. So what I've done, I'm going to walk some of the same ground that Frank walked earlier, but from a different perspective. So what I did for this was go through the extant safety culture literature to try and pin this down. My anchor, as I walked through this field, was process safety disasters and serious injuries and fatalities. And in my head, I kept the question, how do I stop them? What is it that we do in academia and in the safety culture world? What do we do and what are we doing that works? And that's my base and anchor for all of this. So if some of you find this a little controversial and provocative, c'est la vie. Okay? So, it's an evidence-based approach. The journey that we're going to go on is from the start point of safety culture. We're then going to walk through the safety culture swamp. We then go to the safety culture peaks, through the forest, through the valley of death, where we subject the extant literature to a survival of the fittest test. Does it relate to safety performance? Yes or no? That's the question. And then we go down the long and winding safety culture road to try and strive to reach safety culture excellence. Strive. So, the start point. The term safety culture originated just after Bhopal in India in 1984, and it was used to refer to a nation's approach to safety. That's where it first came from. So apparently India didn't have the same emphasis on safety that the US and Europe would have. And it was really interesting because actually in America, Canada, they had exactly the same problems. You guys know today as responsible in the chemical industry came from this, Bhopal. So it was the industry's first attempt to change the entire safety culture of an industry. If you're a member of responsible care in the chemical industry, you have to set standards and your safety management systems to control safety. This term was then picked up after Chernobyl, which we all know by the International Atomic Energy Agency, who then used it and referred to organizational errors and operator violations. So in other words, it was looking at the symptoms of safety culture at that time. Then there was an instruction, 1989, where the US, the NRC, National Nuclear Regulatory Commission, said, everyone has a duty and an obligation to foster the development of a safety culture at each facility and throughout the facility that assures safe operations. It's grounded in safe operations. And that's a key thing to remember. Then 91, in the report that came out, they said it's that assembly of characteristics and attitudes in organizations and individuals which establishes that as an overriding priority, nuclear power safety issues receive the attention warranted by their significance. So now they've moved to underlying causes, not the symptoms. When I came to safety When I came to safety culture, I was doing my PhD, and I was trying to improve behavioural safety in the construction industry and it was a project funded by the British HSE. At the time, James Reason was at the same university that I was at, so I got to talk with him. We then had Piper Alpha. 162 people lost their lives. 2 of those people were people I worked with when I was on the tools. I was a scaffolder. I worked construction, I was a scaffolder. And I worked with 2 of those boys. So for me, safety is very, very personal on many, many different levels. So I wanted to know, here's this concept, how do we make this real? How do we make this tangible? How do we make this concrete? How can we go away and help people stop killing other people or killing themselves? How can we do that? That was my thrust. And that was how I ended up in this field. So we're now going to explore very briefly what I call the safety culture swamp. And I call it a swamp because we have lots of inputs, regulators, managers, psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists. If we take psychologists in their own discipline in one particular field, most of them can't agree with each other. Now imagine you've got 5 different groups of people trying to come in and all explain what safety culture is. So I asked the question, have we lost the plot? Because when I was going through the literature, I found out the Australians, funnily enough, had identified it last year, because the Australian safety regulators are trying to pin down what they should be doing in safety culture. It was found 51 separate, distinct definitions of safety culture and 30 separate, distinct definitions for safety climate. Safety climate's a very close cousin of safety culture, and it's thought to reflect people's views on safety at this particular point in time and in terms of the culture. Culture's more durable, it's long-lasting. Climate is right now, it's a snapshot of safety right now. That's what it means. That's the distinction. But how have we got in the position where we've got 51 separate definitions for a construct, it's a social construct? How have we got there? Why can't we agree on what safety culture actually is, what it refers to? What's the difficulty? And the difficulty stems primarily from the way you look at it. Social scientists like Frank, they talk about understanding a culture, the interpretive view. We can't do anything until we fully understand it. So, which is great. It's one view, and it's Frank's work's done a lot of good around the world, and it's been used by a lot of people. But it's just one view. The other view is what practitioners take, managers, regulators, and so on, which is the functionalist view, where we say there is a thing called a safety culture and we can manipulate it, we can engineer it. James Reason is a functionalist. I'm unashamedly a functionalist, because for me, at the end of the day, safety culture is only useful if it helps stop an incident or saves a life. If it doesn't do that, there's no point having it. It's not an intellectual debate, because there's one thing we all have to keep in mind. Death is permanent. It's not like organizational culture in lots of different topics. It doesn't have the same consequence. If you make a mistake in quality culture or production culture, it doesn't kill people. Safety culture does. Death is permanent. That's the reason we do this. People who develop these different definitions, in my view, seem to have lost sight of that particular fact. It's very academic, it's very esoteric, and it goes round and round and round in circles, because people and academics get into semantics and pedantics, but it doesn't help us stop an incident. If you look at it all, at the end of the day, interpretive views, functionalist views, two sides of the same coin, they are reciprocal. You understand your culture, you put in practical strategies. Once you've put in your practical strategies and the reality's changed, then you can go back and use your interpretive functions. It's just two different methods to get to the same thing. But the debates are so heated that it actually destroys the things that we're trying to do. Industry is losing patience. It's now developing its own definitions because it wants to know what it should do, and how you define culture determines how you're going to approach it in a functional way. What are you going to do? Now, when I look at all of these definitions, there's three facts that just are startlingly clear, regardless of which way you look at this. Simple. Let's accept that safety culture means proactively managing safety. That it also refers to the way we think about safety, and it also refers to the way that we behave in relation to safety, how we manage safety, how we actually manage our own individual behavior. Three things, very simple. Now, surely with the power of the intellect that we have in this domain, that we can come up with one standard definition that everybody agrees with. And I will leave that to you to ponder and to think. Now we go to the safety culture peaks. So in some sense, I'm going to go over some ground that Frank's already been over. So we start climbing Frank's hill. The safety culture peaks is Galdemond and stroke Shine, because Frank adopted Shine's model. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, and I did the same but with Bandura. So what have we got? We got the most visible to the least visible. We have visible artifacts, what people do and what they have. It's what we can see, the things that Frank's not overly fond of, but they're there. Okay? Then we have what we call espoused values or conscious attitudes. Why people do what they do and why they have what they have. Justification, as Frank said earlier. And then we come to the root of the problem, the core basic assumptions. Invisible, unwritten codes of conduct. Frank himself has been in an organisation for 3 months, and at the end of that 3 months has written himself how difficult it is to identify those core basic assumptions. We don't have a taxonomy of core basic assumptions. And the people who do this kind of work, their results are validated by the level of agreement of the people in the organisation, the mirror, that says, yeah, we agree with your interpretation. There were some psychologists, and I write on personnel selection amongst other things and motivation, some psychologists who gave some candidates some astrological charts and says, does this describe you as a candidate? And they all said yes. We're in the same space when we're talking about core basic assumptions because we don't have an anchor. If we're going to use the core basic assumptions, then at least we should have a taxonomy, something we can structure and something we can anchor this work to. I'm not saying the work's wrong. I'm saying it needs improving. Okay? So, my other problem with this, if I change someone's core basic assumptions and their attitudes, is it going to stop a process safety disaster? Is it going to stop someone being killed? And let me be very clear about this. In the absence of goals and action, changing someone's attitudes and assumptions will not stop a process safety disaster or a serious injury and fatality. It will not stop it. There's a guy called Schwartz, I think he died last year, but he's done a lot of work on values. I think changing the core basic assumptions to values might serve a better purpose. I'm not sure whether these are the right values or not, but they're a starting point to develop this taxonomy. And Schwartz is very interesting. He comes up, he's clustered them, factor analysis has put them in these kind of clusters, and it could be very useful to say, well, a company with a very good safety culture is transcendent and conservation, a mix between the two. A company with a bad safety culture, they might be open to change, but the wrong change, or they're into self-enhancement. I don't know. I don't know the answers. But I'm offering it up to reinforce the point that we need a taxonomy of core basic assumptions if we're going to use this. We cannot keep going which way the wind blowing. People are going to die. The Cooper model. This is based on Bandura's social learning theory. And my professor, when I was doing my PhD, he's a personality psychologist. He's one of the main characters in British psychology. And he kept talking to me about Bandura's work. And I looked at it, and all of a sudden it clicked. We have three things. We have a psychological aspects, which is an element of input. We have behavioral aspects. We have situational aspects. So psychological aspects, how do people feel about safety? What's their individual and group values, attitudes and perceptions about safety? And that's encapsulated in Shell's Hearts and Minds approach. That's what it's doing. Then we have the behavioral aspects, what people do, safety related actions and behaviors, safety leadership behaviors. In other words, people's daily actions. And then we have the situational aspects. So in safety, we have safety guidelines, rules, procedures, and so on. They're guidelines. We cannot possibly codify every single behavior in our rules and procedures, but we can give general principles. In this situation, you do this, and so on and so forth. So the behavioral aspect, there's a huge tradition in psychology that's been looking at behavioral safety. Some of you know it as behavior-based safety or behavioral safety. So that's kind of how you can measure that. This we can measure, the psychological aspects, we can measure with the attitude surveys or the perception surveys, safety climate, and so on. The situational aspects we can measure, which you already do, through safety management system audits. So I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel, I'm trying to find a model that can help explain how this works. And this model is reciprocal. So my behavior in a particular situation, my behavior here, I could do something really dumb and change this situation. You could change this situation. You could all say, I'm talking nonsense, walk out and leave me standing here. So there's a reciprocal relationship, but it's all based on our perception of that situation. So when I first got to the States and took up this professorship, I began to think, I'd thought about this a lot more, and one of the reasons I went to be an academic from running a company was it gave me time and space to look back at all the data I'd collected over the previous decade and try and make sense of what we've got from the real world. And what did I learn? Well, we've got inputs. Hearts and minds, the perceptions, the way we think about safety is an input to the safety culture. Daily actions is an input to the safety culture, and safety guidelines are an input to the safety culture. And then we have a transformation process. What is that transformation process? It's companies' goals, expectations, what the expectations that are set by the top and down throughout the management structure. And then we have the management's daily practices. And in a sense, what that is leadership. If I had a bowl and I picked up this bowl and I threw all the ingredients, the inputs into there, and I take my pen, which is leadership, and I mix this up, how well I mix this up determines the quality of my safety culture. Leadership. David Scotty tomorrow morning. Where are you, David? Yeah. He's talking about leadership tomorrow. There's a man who actually knows what he's talking about. Okay? You come make sure you're at his lecture tomorrow morning. Believe me. Okay? So, but that gives us the safety culture. Now we've got to ask, is it good, bad, or indifferent? And I know amongst the specialist group there's a debate as to whether you look at that or not. People in industry who are trying to stop people killing themselves or blowing up their assets, that's what we're interested in. Is it good, bad, or indifferent? What have we got to do to improve? How do we know? Well, for me, because if you look at a lot of these definitions, it talks about safety culture is the product of. Everyone's still, all the definitions are still looking at the inputs. We've forgotten an oversight looking at the product. And when I first put this together in 2000, I put up this as an offering and said that observable degree of effort by which all organisational members direct their attentions and actions towards improving safety on a daily basis. And for those of you who have been to management school, you will know that's goal-setting literature. You will know that. It's what goals do. They direct attention and action. Interestingly, in the patient safety field, and I know there's some guys here from the health field, that's the only industry I've seen in the literature that use the product as a measure of their safety culture. And they've done it to very good effect. I've never seen it anywhere else. So well done, you health people. Let's keep it going. So, we've got James Reason's model. James Reason's model also stresses safety culture is a product of various interacting elements. Those interacting elements for James Reason is we have an informed culture, we have a learning culture, a flexible culture, a just culture, a reporting culture. Edgar Schein yesterday was speaking to us. He's talking about open and just culture. For me, all he did was reiterate James Reason's work 100%. He took James Reason's work and just told us the same thing. So clearly, if you have a flexible culture, you're adaptive in certain situations. Clearly, if you have a learning culture, you put your efforts into training your people to do their job right. And it's interesting with competency and training. In safety, we train people till they get it right. A maestro, an expert in their field, trains until they cannot get it wrong. How much resource do you put into training your people so they cannot get it wrong? Anybody been in the military? Who's been in the military? Anybody? Nobody? Bloody hell. One or two. You know what I'm talking about. Over and over and over, you rehearse those behaviours. How to use a weapon, how to strip down a weapon in the dark blindfold. Less than 30 seconds. When after I left the military, I took my number 4 and 5 twin daughters when they were about this size to a local fete in the town. There was some Royal Engineers. They had a weapon, and I said, "Oh, I used to use that." And they said, "Do you think you can still do it?" I don't know. So they blindfolded me, put me in a tent. I hadn't handled that weapon for over 20 years, and I stripped it down and put it back together again, blindfold, in 29 seconds. And I had not picked it up for 20 years. When you do safety training, make sure you train people to the point they have that level of expertise and competence. Think about it. Okay? So all of these things go into these elements. So I think what we've got common is safety culture is a product. I think everyone's kind of in agreement with that. I think the issue is how we're going to define that product. And I think as a group, if you really want to focus some attentions, that's what you should be doing. We're quite clear about the different inputs, but we're not clear about that product. Okay? So, now we go through the forest. Why do we call it the forest? Because there's numerous surveys, numerous topics, numerous ways of looking at safety culture. How do we anchor it? So, I went back to the IAEA's original definition, which I think by and large is a very good one. I have a problem with the word attitude, but aside from that, I think it's actually very good. But I used it as a framework, and I broke it out. That assembly of characteristics, our systems, our technology, organizational. Someone was asking questions about the technology. It's in there. Then we break it out by attitudes, then break it out by significant safety issues. What are those? So I just use that as a framework to take a look at what we should be measuring. In safety culture terms, in 2000, when my model was published, Frank's model was published, Rona Flynn from Aberdeen had done some work, and she'd looked and done a frequency count across all the different people who were measuring safety climate and perceptions at that time. And she came up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These were the common topics by which people were measuring safety climate. And she put down what these things were. I was involved in, as a witness, in a major disaster. As a piece of that work, I had to look at the common threads that spun through all the process safety disasters going back to the 1970s. And what did we get? Ineffective leadership, a blame culture, miscommunicating, ignoring lessons learned, inattention to risk, profit coming before safety, competency failures, non-compliance. And it's managerial non-compliance, not the guys. Managerial non-compliance. Okay? So when I put these things together, voila, very close correspondence. We know what the characteristics are that's going to help us stop process safety disasters and serious injuries and fatalities. We know what the focus of our safety culture measurement should be. It's known, and there's a high degree of correspondence between industry and academia. Does that work? Yeah. So now we take attitudes. An attitude is a psychological construct. It's not a physical thing. I will ask you guys want to take photos of these slides. I will say to you later, you give me your business cards or give them to Ivan and make sure that you get this slide set. You can have the slide set. It's not an issue. So, what is it? It's an attitude takes to a habitual mode of regarding anything, a consistency towards some object or characteristic. When we talk about an attitude, we're talking about one thing or more. When you break it out, we have a cognitive component, there's a conscious belief, there's an affective component, how we feel emotionally towards it, there's an evaluative component, judgment whether it's good or bad, and a cognitive component, a disposition to act. I think that IAEA focused on these two, I'm not sure. Okay? But that's about one object, guys. The relationship between attitudes and behavior is so weak, it's not even really useful. You look at all the academic literature going back 100 years. It doesn't work, guys. Think. This is one company, one organization right here now. How many attitudes have you got about how many different topics in safety? Different elements of safety. And we as safety culture people and managers, HSE managers, we want to change your attitude so that they're good. We've got to change 4 components for every individual object that you have an attitude about, for every single person. Now think if you've got a facility in Singapore, Australia, Canada, America. Guys, it's practically impossible to do. Think about this. So, very difficult to change. Research shows us that. So, but if you recognize safety as social activity, one person's behavior can destroy a facility. All dependent upon each other for safety. So, when you look at it from that way, what have we got? We've got shared beliefs, attitudes, values, and norms. These are the kind of things that we get thrown into these definitions. And Stan yesterday did a very good job of telling us, well, actually, what degree are these shared? There's different cultures, differentiation, there's ambiguity, and so on. Well done. And it's a very good point to make. We call them, a quick, easy way of putting them is subcultures. You've got subculture. You've got one safety culture, overarching, but there's different ones, different departments, engineers, managers, professionals, work groups. There's all of these different subcultures. Okay? So now let's take a quick look at that literature. Values. Frank talked about Schwartz and his work on values. Very good piece of work. And he talks about one value, one, has 6 elements. So he talks about belief. Well, I've put this in safety terms. My belief, good safety, good for business. It has a desirable goal. Our goal is to keep the product in the pipe, which is process safety originally, and maintain a 0 total recordable incident rate. It's transcendent. Nothing we do is worth getting hurt for. It has a standard criteria. We will not do anything that puts people and assets at risk. It has importance. Safe production is our #1 priority, not safety. If safety is truly your #1 priority, do a risk assessment, work out what the risks are, close down your business and go home and live in bed. If you talk to the guys and say safety is #1 priority and all they get from their supervisors and line management, yalla yalla, joldy joldy, hurry up, hurry up. Is safety really #1? But if you go, safe production is our #1 priority. Guys, we have to produce, whatever that is, but we've got to do it safely. Can you help us? Then you can create the dialogue, the safety partnership between leadership and employees. Then you've got the vehicle to do it. And then there's an action guide. If there's any doubt, safety wins out. So if you want to treat safety as value, that's the kind of thing that you would put down to specify what you actually mean. Make it concrete, make it clear. For safety culture researchers, when they're talking about values in safety, do exactly the same thing. Make sure you hit all 6 components. If you're looking at attitudes, hit all 4 components. We must do this if we're going to make progress in this field. Then we've got norms. A norm is any pattern of behavior or performance that's typical or representative of a group or a society. But they break down into 3 things. Everything psychological breaks down. We have subjective norms, the pressure that people perceive from important others to perform or not to perform a behavior. Descriptive norms, perceptions of significant others' own attitudes and behaviors, and behavioral norms. So psychologically, we got these 2. And what's really interesting, descriptive norms has the biggest impact. The guys are going to listen to the guys, not the supervision. Supervisor says, work safely. Let's get this done, we earn some money. They're going to go with the guy who earns the money. That is even more reason why we need to create a safety partnership between management, leadership, and the workforce. Safety is politically neutral as far as it can be in organisations, and it's the one thing where anybody can die. It's determined by rank. Okay? So, the IAA's inclusion of attitudes in its safety culture definition also explicitly, they stated it very clearly, concerns the requirement to match all safety issues with appropriate perceptions and action. It wasn't just values, espouse values, core basic assumptions. It was about action. So when we look at the safety climate perception literature, the safety climate literature, it refers to a way of regarding, understanding or interpreting how safety management is being operationalized in the workplace, particular moment in time. So the assumption is that perceptions serve as a frame of reference for guiding behaviours, and it's an assumption. We shall see. So the scale of what we want to do when we add in values, beliefs, attitudes and norms into a definition, you've suddenly increased what you want to measure. And if you just add those three things or multiply those three things together, values have got 6 components, attitudes 4 components, norms 3 components, gives you 72 different permutations. No wonder we're all running around chasing our tails, because we don't know what we're measuring. And when we are measuring it, we're not doing it very well. If we focus on the way that people think about the way safety's been done and can be improved, focus on how proactive people are managing safety or behaving safely or improving safety, and use the safety culture product, that observable degree of effort, then we can get there. So, we have common underlying in the forest significant safety issues. We know what causes process safety disasters. This comes from 4 different reviews across Europe, from Britain and right across Europe, that says this is what causes process safety disasters. And guys, I have to admit, is there's a depressing similarity of causes. These are what's known. It's not all accidents and all the causes, but these are the main things that cause process safety disasters. We go to serious injuries and fatalities, and I'm not talking about minor injuries, but what have we got? Exactly the same things that cause process safety disasters is what causes serious injuries and fatalities. And the research tells us 80% of these causes are attributable to management's behaviour, not the guys on the front line. Where do you focus all your efforts? On the guys at the front line. You bypass and miss the main cause of all of these disasters. Management's behaviour. Focus on leadership. I'm urging you, seriously, go and listen to David in the morning. Seriously. I used all this data to come up with a revised safety culture model. We've still got the psychological components, we've still got the situational components, we've still got the behavioural components. That doesn't change. What we've done is honed in on what the research tells us is important. Not opinion, what fact tells us is important. We've got psychological values, attitudes, norms and perceptions. In a sense, that would be the Gordon-Monshine model running down through there. Then we come along, we've got our safety culture characteristics. This is where we should target our measures. Then we got the significant safety issues aligned with what we measure. They're all aligned. Then we use that observable degree of effort, the product, as a way of measuring the degree of improvement. Are we getting any better? And then as in terms of our outcomes, measurable outcomes, we look at leading and lagging indicators. And I'm not talking just about actual incidents, I'm also talking about potential incidents. What's the number of potential loss of containments you've had? What's the number of potential serious injuries and fatalities have you had? Don't wait for people to get hurt. Don't wait till you've blown up the facility. Start looking at the potential. Now we go through the survival of the fittest test. How does the research data stack up against stopping incidents? How well does it relate? Well, to prevent we've got to do this because we've got to know that we're in the right ballpark. We put 4 criteria together. If there's a demonstrable and reliable, consistent relationship to concrete outcomes, i.e. incidents and or safety behaviour, it's a survivor. If it's weak and inconsistent relationships to outcomes, it's critically wounded. If there's no demonstrable relationship, it's dead. And if there's no evidence at all, it's missing in action. These are very military terms because the safety culture researchers remind me of the Crimean War, where 600 British cavalrymen charged thousands of Russians with the big guns by mistake. And the poem goes, ours is not to reason why, ours is but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. And safety culture research is pretty much doing the same thing. The first casualties are the 1,000 safety climate studies that have used self-report accident history, self-report behaviours as their outcome measure. Those studies carry with them the twin diseases. And those diseases are common method variant problems where you get a general inflation across all your correlations, across the relationships. And social desirability responding where you get inflated scores. I've been in facilities, I did one particular company right across Europe in the terminals. We were in Georgia next to Russia. The Russians had just finished bombing the place. And all we got was 5, 5, 5, 5. Momtaz, excellent, brilliant, all the way across the board. Are you serious? Self-report data is contaminated. It might lead us to have a look at things, but it's still got to be tested in the real world. What do we find? Safety climate perceptions relationship with actual injuries and incidents, critically wounded. Just 9% of all of those studies have assessed their survey results against actual outcomes. And the relationships that do exist are so weak as to be almost non-existent. There is a field, there's some researchers, Dolph Zohar being one of them, who says that a safety climate score will predict performance in 5 months' time, which is a big mistake. It's not the safety climate scores that predict it, it's the goals and actions as a result of the diagnostics that leads to the improvement. It's not the climate measure itself. Safety climate perceptions and actual safety behaviour, critically wounded. There's only 3 studies in the published literature that looked at this. Mine was one of them, Ian Glendon's was one of them, and another one in aircraft maintenance. That's it. After 30 years' work, we've got 3 studies looking at perception and behaviour. We look at attitudes to actual incidents. Critically wounded. There's no relationship. We look at attitudes to actual behaviour, non-existent to weak relations, critically wounded. We look at values against actual incidents and injuries, missing in action, no published data. We look at safety norms in relation to accidents and injuries, no data, nothing published. And we're basing all of the real world actions in safety culture on stuff that has no clear relationships. Guys, I'm passionate about safety. I think you can gather that. I had my arm stuck in a cement mixer. I've nearly seen my brother killed. When I was a supervisor scaffolding, I did see one of my people killed and I had to go and tell the widow. We have got to get this anchored in the real world. As I did this piece of work in Mexico, another 13 people killed, another 123 injured. What are we doing? Seriously. Then we looked at the situational, the safety management system. Highly interesting. If you've got a safety management system that meets OSHA S 18001 standards, you will have a very clear reduction in injuries. It goes across the maritime industry. When the IMO introduced the safety management system in the maritime industry, you can, from 1993, you can see a clear downward thing in incidents. You see it in the global oil and gas industry over the last 20 years. Bang, down it's come. Guys, get a decent safety management system in there that's flexible, adaptive. You will reduce injuries. The data tells us that. Very clear relationship. Then we look at the behavioural factors, the things we should not be looking at, according to Frank. But voila, very clear relationships with a history and a tradition of research that shows us a very clear relationship between improving safety behaviour, reducing injuries. On a project in Qatar in the oil and gas industry, building 2 super LNG trains, I worked with 47,000 third-party nationals who worked 121 million man-hours without a single lost time injury, from focusing on behaviour. Why shouldn't we be looking at it? Why shouldn't it be part of the safety culture domain? Why should we exclude a major element that works? Nonsense to say otherwise. True north. How do we stop process safety disasters? How do we stop incidents? Achieving safety culture excellence takes a long time, according to Shine, up to 20 years to become embedded. Focus improvements, the data tells us we in industry need to focus our improvements on the situation behaviour link. 80% of our efforts need to be focused there because the data tells us if we focus on the psychological components, we're going to be running around like headless chickens for another 30 years. It requires a consistency of purpose, focus, and execution. ExxonMobil's mantra. Purpose, change management's behaviour. You change management's behaviour, leadership's behaviour, it will have a knock-on effect all the way down the line. Focus on the 6 safety culture characteristics and their significant safety issues. The data tells us what we should be focusing on from lots of different researchers across the globe. There's a commonality. Why are we ignoring it? And execution, continually monitor goal progress in all areas to ensure there's goal achievement. Use that observable degree of effort, the product. Frank talked about the safety culture maturity models and says he's quite right, questioning where's the data, how do they link to safety performance. There's a whole lot of work got to be done with them, don't disagree. I think the HSE's one that they developed in the labs, the HSE labs from 2007 is brilliant. It was developed with industry, which makes it different from other things. But in a sense, every single one of those maturity models is a measure of that degree of effort because you are stepping up. So bring it into the field, bring it into part of your assessment, use it. Guys, at the end of the day, whatever works, use it. Don't worry about the theoretical models. So, thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Dominic. Empezar las preguntas con el grupo de expertos internacional, si hay. Siempre la primera es la más difícil. Acá.
Sorry, ladies, I can't pose just now.
Well, thanks, Dominic. I sympathize with your point that there's a need to create a link between safety culture and safety outcome to show whether we're chasing the good rabbit. You said that there are some studies that demonstrate this link with personal injuries. What are your thoughts about process or product safety?
That's interesting. There is no research that I'm aware of that specifically looked at all of these psychological variables in relation to process safety incidents. I haven't seen anything as yet. Not to say that it doesn't exist. And I've certainly done work in the safety climate field. I've evaluated upstream business for big major oil companies who refuse to give you the outcome data. So I don't publish, there's no point, because I haven't got it linked to outcome data. And Frank, in his role as the editor of the Safety Science, I'm a reviewer, and he knows I'm always saying, where's the link, where's the link? So I'm very concerned about linking them with outcomes. So you guys who are doing process safety work, and you're using these surveys, why don't you, it's like writing a book and then putting the manuscripts on the shelf, you don't publish it. Why don't you guys who might have this data publish it, send it to Frank, get it in the literature so people, academics can make use of it, other people can make use of it. And I know a lot of companies don't want to release their incident data. There's ways of doing it, you don't have to release the actual. But you take Catagas, every incident it ever has, it posts on its website. Very open, very upfront, here's the data, off you go. Why aren't you guys like that too? Let's all learn from each other. Safety, that's the whole point of safety. We're all affected. So, very good question, Corinne. Did it answer your question?
Yeah, the thing is that we're talking about very rare events. So, I mean, measuring the outcome is not as easy as...
But then you've got potential incidents, which is where you've got the potential leaks because someone hasn't done this. There's got to be a way. We're measuring right now, our company have come up with a way of measuring potential serious injuries and fatalities through observations. We do that now. We know what the precursors are, we know what the exposure categories are, we know what the underlying contributors are. We should be able to do that in the same way in the process safety field. And every company, every industry will be different, slightly different metrics. I'm sure the nuclear industry's got different ways they could look at potential incidents, health certainly potential incidents, just miscommunications and things like that. There must be ways of doing it. If there's a willingness, there's a way. Yes?
Another question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a related question because I'm a bit confused. You seem to prefer this direct link between cause and consequence, that there should be a measurable relationship between cause and consequence.
I do, yeah.
Are you recommending us to stop searching for root causes? Because then you will not find the direct measurable relationship between the root cause and the consequence, because it is by definition an indirect relationship.
What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to get to is if I produce a safety culture score, and Frank was quite right earlier talking about scores and the way they relate to outcomes and so on. And what I'm trying to say is if I've got a score of 5, do I have 0 injury rate? Do I have 0 potential injury rate? Am I 0 across the board genuinely? If I've got a score of 2, does that tell me that I've got an incident rate on either side of 0.56? What does it tell me? And until we go there, we don't know what we're doing is effective. That's my problem right now. So we've got researchers now looking at job satisfaction, fatalism, and all sorts of weird and wonderful constructs that got nothing to do with improving and stopping a process safety incident. Yeah? And it's not linked to outcomes. So if we can demonstrate there is a link between those variables and outcomes, and it's going to help save a life, then it's important to have. That's really where I'm going. Underlying contributors, sure, very, very important. Do they relate? Can we get measures then, if you want to use that as an intervening variable, can you get measures that will measure that to measure that? I don't know. We've got to be much better at linking what we do to outcomes. We can't just keep running around theoretical world, conceptual world, coming up with stuff that we think might work, and watching another 100 people die or get injured. We haven't got that luxury, guys. As I said earlier, we're not in the quality field. We've damaged a few cans of goods or break a few bottles. We're not in that world. We are talking about people's lives. And everyone who dies was someone's son and someone's daughter. Do you want your children to die? I've lost one daughter at the age of 30. You would hate to go through what I went through on that day. We forget because we put people's deaths in numbers. We don't remember that they are someone's child. Every single one of us. Think about what we're doing. So really in answer, Stein, we don't have an option. We've got to come up with things that stop these incidents. We've got to come up with effective strategies and effective measures. Yes, sir.
François, and then Dunia.
Well, you are saying if you do not agree with me, people will die. So I think I don't agree with you, and I hope nobody will die.
Well,
I have a feeling that what you're saying applies more to the prevention of what can be anticipated, what the organization can think of by anticipation. And it doesn't rely so much to the management of the unexpected, when you need the professionalism of people to do something that has not been anticipated by rules. They should take the right decisions, even if there is no procedure, no rule to fix the situation. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think we have to be reflexive. I think decision-making is important. I think we need to have the principles. We need to take every single leader or manager in a company or organization to put safety at the forefront of their thinking when they're looking at what they're going to do. And one of the root causes of serious injuries and fatalities is job planning. And I've looked at incident databases ad infinitum and trying to look what for a company, where's your potential SIFs, serious injuries and fatalities. Job planning, behavioural choices, job planning, keep coming up for level 5, deaths or life-altering injuries. And by the way, you don't have to agree with me. I'm not saying you have to agree with me or else you're wrong. I've got a different take on the field. All I've done is gone through the literature and I'm going by the data. That's it. This is what the data is telling me. I had no preconceived notions when I did this. I wanted to know what the data told us because I'd set a research agenda in the original paper back in 2000. And this gave me an opportunity to look at that research agenda. So this is just what the data's telling me. If it had come up, and I really wish the safety climate stuff had worked. I was the first one in the UK to do it. The measure that we developed there morphed into the HSE's safety climate tool. I've been working on this stuff for 25 years. The fact that it doesn't work means I'm included as much as all the other researchers for not doing a proper job on it. I include myself in this. I don't exclude myself. I'm not standing here saying I'm better or worse than anybody else. I'm saying it's a different take, but it's what the data tells us. We are scientists. We live by evidence. This is what the evidence says. So if you're a scientist, you use data and evidence. If you don't like the evidence, go and research it yourselves and validate what I've come up with. Simple.
It seems to be very, I would say, deterministic. The causes, the consequences, and if you work on the causes, you will have the outcome, the desirable outcome. So it seems to be very deterministic. We don't see what is outside that can challenge or have an impact on it. And what's about the time you need between the beginning, I would say, when you decide to work on the causes and the time you will get the desirable outcomes?
That's a very interesting question. The latter one's a very interesting question. Whether it's deterministic or not, I don't really care. All I don't want to do is save someone's life. Yeah, to be quite frank. If it saves someone's life, then we did a good thing. Yeah? One day, you may have to go and see St. Peter. And you say, I didn't like the deterministic stuff, I wanted to go elsewhere. And in the meanwhile, 50 people died. But it doesn't matter because I was interested in that. Okay? So it's the latter one that's more interesting. When we do something, what's the timeline to make the impact? It's a very, very good question. Where's the research? Where is it? I know from doing BBS that within a year, I could probably, well, I guarantee I'll reduce the injury rate by 40% inside 12 months. If the company says and does what I tell it to do and how to do it. If it follows, then it works. And I know it. I've got data going back to the 1989 that shows it. Demonstrable, and some of it's published, and you can grab it off my website. It's free. Okay? Leadership. We talk about leadership, and David's talking about leadership. I've been working on leadership, and we've got very practical tools. We've got leadership software where the guys go and have their dialogues with the guys. They go and do an observation. They have a conversation. From the conversation, they work out the underlying root cause for that behavior, and at the same time, they're asked, was this behavior that you saw a potential serious injury or not? And then it takes you down through precursors, exposure categories, and so on. Well, I've looked at it. I go in there from different clients, and they're all around the world. I go in there and look at some of the stuff because I'm very interested to work out how much people's behavior is a personal choice and how much driven by the management systems. And every time I go in there, I know this year alone, we've stopped 5 people dying. We know. We've got the observation, we've got the detail, we know what the underlying cause is, we know it, okay? And on the question that I'm trying to answer, how much is unsafe behavior, a lot of people, DuPont is going to tell you it's 94%. It's not. It's around about 55, 56%. Through our databases, we're finding it's actually 51, 49%. 51% of the time someone behaves unsafely, they've made that personal choice, that decision to do that. But the other 49% has been driven by inadequate job standards, inadequate work environment, using substandard equipment, poor communications, and so on and so on and so on. So we know that. But it's a very good question in terms of safety culture. If we do A, B, and C, what's the timeline? I would love to be able to give the answer. And all I can say, there's a research agenda. You guys are in the real world. You're doing these things. How long does it take you to do it? What's the impact? How are you going to feed that information back to the rest of the world so they can make use of it? It isn't just for academics to do research. We need real-world data from real-world companies doing real-world things. Share it.
Okay. We have another question there, and then, okay. And okay. First one. Yeah.
Sí, por favor, ¿me podría...?
Un momento. Para la traducción.
Un momento, por favor, señor.
Ya.
No hablo usted español, ¿eh?
Sí, en inglés. Sí. ¿Podrían, en su tesis que ha puesto, trabajo magnífico, me podría decir, o nos podría decir, la vinculación en las compañías aéreas, lo que es la seguridad, si los altos directivos, los ejecutivos, tienen la cultura de seguridad que los servicios de operaciones de seguridad de las compañías aéreas están con conciencia con todos los acontecimientos últimamente vinculados a la formación, bien vinculantes a la seguridad. ¿Cómo lo ven usted? Lo que es la seguridad actual en las compañías aéreas, por los altos directivos de las compañías aéreas. O sea, no que vuelen los aviones, no los pilotos o todo el personal de mantenimiento, sino cómo ven ellos esa cultura, cómo Porque me gustaría saberlo. Después de tantos años, pues me gustaría saber cuál es su mentalidad, la formación que tiene de todo esto, ¿no? Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you. I think I understood the question as what do I think in the airline industry of the relationship between senior executives in the way they look at safety culture and operations per se. Okay. So that's a good one. For me, with my experience of executives, and I have worked in the airline industry in various different countries, if the chief exec set a safety culture vision, we talk about a vision, and the way I describe that is, what does safety culture heaven look like to you guys? Because until you know what safety culture heaven looks like, you can't possibly begin to get there, because you don't know what you're doing as how to get there. So what does safety culture heaven look like? And the executive will work that out, whatever that may be. We ask executives to engage in 10 specific behaviors each and every single week that's measured so that they can demonstrate visible leadership through their support. I got one chief executive of a major pharmaceutical company. He can't go out on the floor and do observations, but once a week he picks up the phone, or his PA does, and rings somebody at random in the organization. They've got 100 manufacturing units worldwide. Picks up, he says, hey guys, tell me, what did you do to improve safety today? And when he gets an answer what they did yesterday, he says, no, that's really good. What did you do today to improve safety? Okay? So, in other words, there's set the vision, what does it look like? Follow through with the support behaviors, whatever they may be, and they decide what they are. Go through and follow the actions. And then when you go down on the ramp or you go down into operations, you see it. And on the ramp, you know, they put the tip cones in place, the way they put the statics, the way they got the way they push back the aircraft and all the rest of it. By and large, those guys are doing things well. But you'll find, because of the way the airline industry works, your flight's late, you go into the wrong gate, you got the wrong ladders for the maintenance guys after, everything's wrong, the equipment's down on that bay and it should be at that bay, and da-da-da-da-da. It's a huge moving engine that you're dealing with. But the guys cope. Do they behave unsafely? Sure, because they've got to turn this thing around. And I've been on ramps where literally we've actually ordered new vehicles and we've got them the stuff on the runways that they should be, in the bay so there's spare and so on and so forth. Problems all gone away. So it's the same thing as any other industry, except you've got more moving parts. And when you've got 138 work shifts, that gets even more difficult with the thing. But they're just moving parts. And when people ask me how have I been able to improve safety so successfully for real in companies, my trick is I look for the constant. What's the constant? There's always moving parts, every organization. What's the constant? What's there that I can anchor and I can build on? That's what I'm looking for. Whether it's system, whether it's behavior, whether it's communication, whatever. What's the constant? And as soon as I got that, then I can leverage off of that, and there's my platform.
Okay, Dominic, we have two last questions. Please, short question and short answer.
I've got image rights. It will cost you $20 a photo.
Okay, I'm here in the back. Hi, Dominic. My question is from here.
Bonjour, madame. Oh, no, grüß Gott.
I wondered, I mean, what you basically did is what academics call a narrative meta-analysis, right? And
pretty
quite
much.
Impressively, I mean, looking through all the evidence. I just wondered, I mean, there have been many actually quantitative meta-analyses done also, and they come to far more positive results with respect to how safety climate actually impacts behavior. And I just wondered how you included those in your own analysis. Do you think they were wrong? How do those two sort of presumably
My criteria,
factuate?
I had a simple criteria. Had they assessed against outcomes? There was one study that actually had looked at it. They had looked at the outcome data, but they hadn't done the relationships. I talk about it in text, in the text to accompany this, but didn't mention it here. But there's only one or two. Okay.